Welcome. It's great to have you here for this guided meditation and Dharma talk. My name is Jonathan Foust, and I just am grateful to have this time to practice and share with you. Before we launch into our meditation, some acknowledgments. First of all, a big thank you to our mindful movement teacher before this live stream class. And a big thank you to Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy, who offer mindful dialogue after this live stream class. A little bit about the whole experience here. If you feel so inclined, at 6:30 p.m., you can take part in a mindful movement class that's designed to help you release deep-seated tensions and help to prepare you for this upcoming meditation, led by three rotating wonderful mindful movement teachers. They rotate as they teach. And afterward, after the meditation and talk, an opportunity to gather with like-minded people, share about your practice and how it's going, anything from the talk that inspired or frustrated you, beautifully facilitated by these great folks. So if you want those Zoom links, you can check my website or check Facebook. Also, a big thank you to our producers, to Glenn Harrison and to Leo Gimo, who does all the video and gets everything ready for streaming and so forth. Also, thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, which is a host for this event, and as well to the Unitarian Universalist Church at Arlington, which has been the home of Monday Night Meditation for many, many years, and hopefully will be again when that's possible. If you want to stay in touch, get information that might support you in your practice, I do have a mailing list. I send out a monthly email where I inflict all kinds of creative stuff on you. You can check that out on my website. And also just a reminder that this is offered in the spirit of generosity. So I've received no direct compensation for this offering. I love what I do. And at the same time, if you feel inspired to support me in my lavish lifestyle and in all the technology that helps to get this live stream out there, thank you for your donations. I appreciate that. No obligation. I'm just happy to be able to share and to have this time to practice together. One final thing, an event you may want to check out is the Insight Meditation Community of Washington Spring Retreat is now open for lottery. So if you want to go to the IMCW website, that's imcw.org, you can sign up for the lottery for the spring retreat. And it's an online retreat. And I have to say, this is my third long residential retreat. It's kind of cool. It's so much more powerful than I thought it might be, as I've been so habituated to residential retreats. But do check it out. It'd be fun to have you there. We've got some really, really great teachers coming up. Okay, that's it for announcements and promos. Let's get ready for meditation. Always helpful to put your cell phone on stun. Make sure you won't be disturbed. Kind of set the stage for this next period of time of drawing your attention inward. You might like to prepare your body a little bit by maybe reaching up overhead. You can stretch up to the left side, to the right side. You're on mute, so you can let out any sounds you want. So feel free to do that. What would feel good to kind of prepare you for meditation? If you like, you can draw your elbows out close to the side. You can make your hands in the fist with a hitchhiker position. Bring your elbows close to your ears. And as you breathe, deepen your breath, draw the breath up under the collarbones. Actively draw your shoulder blades close together. And just breathe and explore what it's like to take the slack out of these muscles that get lengthened along the back, and open and lengthen the muscles across the front of the chest. You do this by breathing up under the collarbones, by drawing your elbows to the side without strain, but mostly focusing on drawing your shoulder blades close together. Let's take 3 more breaths. Slow breath in. Slow breath out. Draw the navel in toward the spine as you exhale. Lift up out of the waist. Relax through the back of the neck. Lengthen softly through the back of the neck. By now, you're probably feeling a little bit of uncomfortable sensations. So as you're ready, reach the arms up one more time. If you like, close the eyes and you can do a slow motion release of the hands if that feels right for you. It's a great way to create absorption and inner focus. Make any little micro adjustments in your posture. If your hands are still floating down, take your time. There's no rush. And just feel the sensation settling. Feel the aliveness, feel the energy, any sense of pulse, any sense of tingling, any sense of vibration, any sense of warmth. And sense this quality of awareness. Who is it that's aware? Well, what is that nature of kind of effortless noticing? As we move into this practice, we'll be using concentration to arrive and to calm. We'll also be exploring this sense of mindful, non-preferential awareness. We'll take some time toward the end of this meditation to sense what it means to simply rest in presence. But for now, if you like, notice where you feel the breath on the inside right now. And you might very gently lengthen and deepen your breath just a bit. And if you'd like, it's a very helpful technique. For the next few minutes, on the in-breath, count slowly to 4 or 5. And then on the exhalation, again, count to 4 or 5. So you match the length of the in-breath with the length of the out-breath. Slow and deep. And notice just the effect after 1 minute of this technique. Do you feel a little more aware on the inside? And you might explore, we'll continue for a few more rounds of breath and try this. Smooth out the breath. So the breath is gentle and smooth, not rough at all, just smooth and flowing. On the next exhalation now, you might very gently let control of your breath fall away. And you might sense now, how much can you unlock the breath? Let the breath be free-floating. Let the breath be effortless. And sense at the same time if you can track what it feels like on the inside, either at the belly or the nostrils or a general sense of the breath. You might now, as well, as you explore this practice of gathering, as I mention a body part, let your attention move to that part of the body. And rather than trying to make anything happen, just sense if you can soften and feel. You may notice this relationship between the intimacy of relaxation and the intimacy of sensing. The forehead and temples. The muscles around the eyes. And scanning through the muscles of the face and the jaw, softening and sensing. And the inside of the mouth. The lips. The tongue. In particular, you might sense if you can relax the tongue and let it fill the lower jaw and track any sense of relaxation or softening down into the root of the tongue. Notice any felt shift. The occipital ridge, the base of the skull, and down through the back of the neck. The tops of the shoulders. And now sensing, softening, feeling down the length of the arms, the elbows, the wrists. Backs of the hands. The palms, thumbs, and fingers. The space inside the throat. And the space inside the lungs. And the space between your navel and your spine. And the space between your hip joints. And sensing the length and the space and the volume of your legs. Down through the knees. Down through the ankles. And tops of the feet and toes. soles of the feet and heels. And how intimately can you sense this inner state of deep relaxation? And simultaneously, this quality of alertness. And moving now, if you like, to an anchor of your choosing. You might elect to track the movement of the breath on the inside at the belly or nostrils or general sense of breath. Or you might like to explore the feeling of the sound vibrations as they're happening around you. You may also find sensing from the inside the palms and fingers and thumbs to be a helpful and powerful anchor for this next period of time. Whatever you choose, let this be your primary focus. But your focus is relaxed. Relaxed, focused presence on your anchor. Recalling that you're not here to control the mind, but to be awake to the mind. So when you notice the mind lost in narrative or far, far away, let that be a moment of celebration. You might offer a gentle smile and then escort your attention back to the experience of your anchor in the here and now. At any point, you can re-arrive and soften, relax, and feel. Draw your attention to the anchor from the inside, relaxed and alert. One aspect of this practice is this quality of arriving. When the mind wanders, to re-engage with the here and now, to calm and gather the sense of present moment awareness. Another is to explore this quality of mindful, non-preferential awareness. And you might, from time to time, widen and broaden your awareness, sensitizing yourself to everything that is changing and sensing the seat of the witness or the observer as the open monitor of impermanence and change. And here you anchor your attention in the senses here and now, and then gently widen and broaden and open to this awareness of change. as if you're toggling from present moment, alive sensation here and now, and to this sense of being the open monitor of what's happening. And from time to time, it can be helpful to bring in these two lenses of the practice. First, the lens of seeing clearly or wisdom. What is your experience right now? How many words would help you to modify or describe the quality of this moment? And the second lens is the lens of loving presence, the lens of being with. And you might inquire, is it possible to let this be? Is there a sense of how this moment would like you to be with it? In these remaining 5 minutes, you might gently refresh the practice. How intimately can you soften inside right now? The muscles of the face and the tongue, the belly and the lower back. The palms and the soles of the feet. And how intimately can you sense your anchor on the inside? Can you sense this quality of the observer, of awareness without preference, awake to what is changing? Is it possible to let things be as they are? Deeply relaxed, at the same time alert. And you might explore, if it feels right for you, easing away from any sense of doing, letting your anchor fall away, any sense of tight control fall away, and just sense, how intimately can I feel right now? How intimately can I soften? What could let go or relax right now? What could let go or relax even more? You might sense now how intimately you can detect the breath on the inside. Where do you feel the breath the strongest? And if you like, you might return to the original breath, where you are breathing in slowly to the count of 4 or 5, and then exhaling slowly to the count of 4 or 5. Match the length of the in-breath with the length of the out-breath. Relax, and at the same time, focused. As I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. And as you sensitize yourself to the aliveness of the senses and what it feels like on the inside, you might sense how your body might like to move. You might gently let the head drift a little to the left and right. Just sense the movement from the inside, and take some time now, as part of your transition, to mindfully, very mindfully with awareness, let your body begin to shift, move, respond in any way that feels good for you. And if you like, you can reach your arms up overhead, open your jaw wide, let out any sounds. Put yourself into a TV breakfast commercial and smile like they do. Ah. welcome. A little bit on the negativity bias. A little quick story. A linguistics professor says during a lecture that in English, a double negative forms a positive. But in some languages, like Russian, a double negative is still a negative. However, in no language in the world can a double positive form a negative. But then a voice in the back of the room piped up and said, "Yeah, right." We are biased toward the negativity. Well, this negativity bias is designed to keep you on the planet. It's designed for self-preservation. And so speaking and looking through that lens of the negativity bias kind of makes sense because it's kind of our default mode. This is the second talk in a series of 10 on what are called the 10 perfections, these qualities that you can polish that help to kind of refine your character and, I guess, your destiny. As I always like to point out, it's a bit of a trap, the idea of something being perfect. But at the same time, perfect sets up, well, then not perfect. So these teachings can be a setup for self-rejection, but at the same time, they can be a really interesting way to look at different ways that you behave, different ways you act, the kind of actions that will support you with where you want to go in your life. So when it comes to this talk, which is about virtue and morality, it's a sticky area because thou shalt not is a lot easier to tune into than thou shalt. So this talk is on being virtuous. The first talk was on being generous. And it's a question like, what does it mean to be virtuous? Cultivating virtue and being morally upright can be such a trap. And you may have noticed that there are lots of traditions out there that are very happy to tell you how to think and how to act. But ultimately, in my humble opinion, this is about your path and what it means for you to be in alignment with thought and speech and your actions. Ultimately, it comes down to this, and this is a question for each of us. What are the rules by which you want to live your life? What that means first is, what do you want? And then what are the riverbanks that are going to support you? So what I'd like to talk about with the little bit of time I have here is first, how all traditions have guidelines. All traditions have kind of ethical behavior guidelines. And a little bit on the confusion between thou shalt not as a way of cultivating virtue. And a little bit on what is the purpose of these ethical trainings? What's on the other side of thou shalt not? And what does it mean to be awake in the world and to be mindful of actions? And how is that mutually supportive? There's such a shadow side to these teachings. And I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about some of the traps we can fall into when we start engaging into conscious use of our actions. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. That's my intent. When I was 15 years old, I learned mantra meditation through transcendental meditation. And the lights came on. My first experience of being guided into it when I got initiated, I had this instant sense of, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. I had such a sense of homecoming. I could just sort of feel that shift in my consciousness. And I became a very dedicated practitioner of transcendental meditation. I was in a boarding school, and I had two buddies, and we'd meditate in the morning, we'd meditate in the evening. When I went to college, I found a little community where we meditated together all through college. In the Peace Corps, I kept it going. And while in the Peace Corps, I was very, very excited about doing a particular course through the tradition of transcendental meditation, referred to as the course in Siddhis, Siddhi. And the word Siddhi refers to an expression of consciousness that looks like kind of like a superpower in a way. The whole idea is that you calm the mind so still. You imagine like there's a pond without any ripple of thought. And yet within that pond without a ripple of thought, you introduce these practices which develop all these amazing capacities. And I won't go into the flashy side of what it promises, but it's pretty dramatic. And so I had $3,000 as my resettlement allowance from the Peace Corps, and my whole 2 years was around paying the tuition, which happened to be $3,000 to do this training. And so on my way to Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa, I happened to stop in at this ashram. I had kind of picked up a bug when traveling in Africa, and I went to see the holistic doctor. And I thought, wait, maybe I'll recuperate here. So I happened to meet with the guru of the ashram. And I told him where I was going and my excitement around learning these practices, which were highly purifying, but also with sort of this flashy promise of what happens when the mind is like fully, or consciousness is fully developed. And it was very interesting, his response. He said, you may find it helpful to focus on purifying your desires before you develop these particular capacities or powers. Because if your desires aren't pure, you're going to use what you've learned to serve your desires. And if your desires aren't pure, that could end up getting you into trouble. And it kind of made sense to me. And he talked about how when you practice kind of organically, there's this natural sort of arising of awareness and consciousness and capacities, and to force it might not be wise. And it's interesting. It was very interesting. It made sense to me, in that I thought, you know what, maybe I'll stay here for a while. That turned out to be 24 years. But I really sense how we all want to develop our consciousness as fully as we can. But it's really helpful to be aware of your motivation for doing it. Can we really trust the potency that comes when you have this coalesced kind of power and influence in life? There's this, I've heard of this curse that says, may you be successful in your youth. And the reason why that's a curse is quite often we don't have the wisdom to handle the power that comes with success. And oh my God, it's so many stories of childhood movie stars whose lives were wrecked, and young artists who make a huge amount of money in their youth, or young athletes who make insane amounts of money and end up kind of destroying themselves. So it's really about cultivating three things. And through this lens of Buddhist psychology, it's around cultivating sila, samadhi, and panya. And so what these are, first is sila is virtue. It's kind of moral rectitude, if you will. Samadhi refers to the development of meditation, of the capacity to pay attention, the different ways you pay attention in life. And panya is the arising of wisdom that comes out of this dance of virtue, of conscious action, and training the mind. So if the powers are not controlled by wisdom and right action, oh my God, the trouble we can get into. The most interesting people to me are the ones who've gone through suffering and come out the other side with wisdom and compassion. The humility that comes through them is so powerful. So those who have walked this path before us have noticed that having riverbanks on your actions can be really helpful. If you think about it, you've got all this energy in your body, all these life energy units available to you. And if they are undirected, they go in all directions. As you know, when you watch the mind untamed is just, as Ramana Maharshi said, a drunken monkey stung by scorpions, over here, over there. Oh, look at this. Wow, look at that. But energy directed, when you take that energy and you can direct it, like the light of awareness, focus can become a laser. You can develop skill and mastery over how you manage your energy. So when you're just run by impulse, when you have no impulse control, it can be entertaining, but maybe not ultimately satisfying. So these teachings, as far as I can tell, and my perception admittedly may be deeply flawed here, these teachings around ethical, moral behavior show up pretty much in every culture. They tend to get translated as thou shalt not. And then when you take on the thou shalt not, these teachings of liberation get perverted into shaming and into perpetual guilt. That's what I find so interesting around, let's say the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not. It can sound like they're handed down by a wrathful, angry God who's got a clear line between good and evil and will punish you if you slip over the line. Well, another perspective is that these teachings are they're a description of an awakened person. Someone who is awake doesn't steal. Someone who's awake doesn't want what other people have. Such a different world. So we engage into these vows. We know many of us, we have kind of the imprint in the traditions in which we are raised of what we shall not do. The first time I kind of took the formal vows in the Buddhist tradition was when I went to my first kind of classical retreat, which was with S.N. Goenka. These retreats are very, very intense. They're 10 days, 10 hours a day. Your actions are very, very prescribed and restricted. And it's a very orthodox retreat. So you begin the retreat by taking what are called the precepts. You take these vows, these 5 vows, which are the vows of a monk when they become ordinated. So in a sense, when you're on a retreat, you're taking the vows of a monk. And they go something like this. For the sake of my training, I vow not to kill. For the sake of my training, I vow not to steal. For the sake of my training, I vowed to abstain from sexual misconduct. For the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from lying. And for the sake of my training, I vow to abstain from taking intoxicants that can cloud the mind. So when you take these in, and you might even just want to close your eyes just for a moment, for the sake of your training to not kill or harm, to not take that which is not freely given, to abstain from sexual harm, to abstain from unwise speech, and to abstain from clouding the mind through the unwise use of intoxicants. And just a sense of the potency of those particular guidelines or riverbanks. So if you like, you can open your eyes, and I find it helpful to think of these as the training rules. Because we're training the mind. We're training this drunken monkey of a mind in this practice. And when we can develop them, the result is wisdom and compassion. So there's a capacity of restraint that goes on here. You're restraining the mind, and then you're watching what happens. So on that retreat, on that first day 10 retreat, an additional commitment was no reading. No reading. It was so painful for me. To not do, my favorite thing in the world was getting in bed with a New Yorker. And I found myself, I kind of woke up in a trance reading the back of my toothpaste tube in the bathroom, just something. Another one was no writing. And a friend of mine ended, he found after his retreat or during his retreat, he found a pencil and he wrote a little novella on toilet paper. So it's an amazing thing. When you practice restraint, you're creating heat, you're creating resistance. And that becomes a really interesting thing to pay attention to because you get to watch how your mind wants to escape. Now, this can be helpful. It can also be damaging, but it can be helpful. And I have to say, when you're on a formal meditation retreat, it's a little bit easier to practice these guidelines. You know, your meals are provided so you don't have to kill anything to eat. No one really owns anything other than their meditation cushion, so stealing is not a big issue on a retreat, although there have been instances of people stealing cushion from each other. In terms of refraining from sexual misconduct, it's relatively easy to do on retreat, but of course, there's a lot of sexual misconduct going on in your mind. You're not speaking, you got a vow of silence, so lying is not an issue. And in a retreat environment, it's a little bit easier to resist the temptation of gross intoxicants. But oftentimes what happens is you find yourself in your relationship with food. And you can begin to sense like, oh my God, I'm actually using food to kind of numb myself. Or, oh, I'm drinking an extra cup of coffee to kind of brighten the mind. All this becomes a mirror for yourself. And then outside the retreat, that's where it gets interesting and a little more challenging when you're not surrounded by like-minded company. These training rules mean that you're going to hit resistance and you're going to have like multiple growth opportunities. And so like anything, any one of these practices of restraint have this way of providing a mirror for your behaviors, but there's also a shadow side to it because it becomes a setup for self-denial, self-rejection, self-judgment. In the ashram where I lived for many, many years, those who were not married had a celibacy vow. And there was one particular teacher, one guru, who reportedly said to my guru, "You're raising a snake pit by forcing everyone to do this." And in some ways he was. So there's something in me that loves challenges and discipline. I found this paradox of how a disciplined life actually creates a lot of freedom for me. And I've taken a lot of intensive trainings. I had a poverty vow or a simplicity vow for, I think it was 13 or 14 years. I had a celibacy vow for 6 years, 9 months, 2 weeks, and about 4 days. So when I moved into the community, this was a requirement. If you had any more than $100, you were supposed to turn it in. And that settlement allowance I had of $3,000, I said to my father, "Happy birthday, Dad." I wasn't willing to give that up. But practicing celibacy, if you really want to crank up the opportunity for growth in your 20s and 30s, surrounded by other people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, who are doing yoga and meditation, eating really clean food, getting lots of sleep, working out in really, really good shape. If you want to crank up some growth opportunities, take a celibacy vow. You know, they say that the halo around a saint's head is the sexual energy transmuted. At least that's what we told ourselves in the ashram. And because it was a requirement to be in the community, we had a lot of energy. We were building energy through intensive yoga and meditation and chanting, and then we had to put that somewhere. So we worked like crazy, and we worked out like crazy, and we ate a lot. That denying of sensual expression was brutal. It was so challenging. But at the same time, I learned lessons I don't know if I would have learned the lessons as clearly as I did. by consciously not engaging into romantic relationships. Here are just a few things that I took away from that. First of all, it became such a mirror for my self-image in relationship. And I found myself in all these patterns of interacting with people, of this sort of binary way I had viewing people of makeable or not makeable. And in people who were makeable or attractive, the way that I would present myself. If I say this and this person says that, maybe it means this. And the whole play, the whole internal play in my head, how I altered my personality to be around someone who I wanted to like me or someone I was attracted to. Seeing that was just so embarrassing. and then recognizing my emotional immaturity. How many people I would have pursued, gotten involved with intimately, but never would have had the emotional maturity to maintain a relationship because I never had before. And then recognizing that people with whom I would have intimately engaged out of my own codependence or neediness, by not acting on it and moving through that restraint of my impulses, that these people that I wouldn't have had the maturity to be friends with became deep, deep friends. I began to really sense how there's sort of this natural movement of the energy kind of down and out, and the practice of maintaining it and even moving it up is so powerful. A story I've told before, but because we were segmented brothers and sisters, that many of us, myself included, got very, very interested in hands-on healing techniques. So we would practice on each other a lot, the brothers. And before one of the satsangs, one of the talks, the guru came in early and saw a lot of us doing these healing touch practices on each other. And he said, no more touching. We're going to go on a touch fast. And I thought, that is cruel and unusual punishment. That's totally unfair. But he said, try this. He said, when you feel attraction or you feel positive energy towards someone, instead of moving into touch, try moving that up into your voice or up into your eyes. As corny as that may sound, it was a profound experience for me to take this natural, habitual expression of attention, affection, or love, and to kind of move it into my eyes, move it into my voice. That practice of restraint, as challenging as it was for those many, many, many years, in many ways transformed me. So you might sense how taking habitual actions and restraining them can be really, really helpful. But there's a real shadow side to this, and it kind of goes back to the negativity bias. Like every tradition, or most traditions, in this desire to create riverbanks for your actions and your beliefs, to move you toward a goal, have a tendency to make the body the enemy, to take the natural forces of aggression and to try to control them through denial. To some degree, that can be helpful and can be effective. But I'm not sure it's ultimately that skillful. To my understanding, and again, this may be flawed, pornography use and abuse is highest in the areas that are fundamentalist. That where there's a repression of the shadow, that shadow has to go somewhere. That energy has to go somewhere. So what you suppress, you express. I remember going to Europe when I was in high school and hanging out with a friend in Switzerland. And There was no drinking age. And it was such an interesting thing for me to see how casual people my age were, 15 years old, were around alcohol. It wasn't a big deal. That wasn't suppressed. And so we have all kinds of ways of being in this dance of supporting the actions that support our outcomes. I grew up in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. Just in my kindergarten class, there were a number of kids who didn't speak English. They only spoke uh, German at home. The Pennsylvania Dutch is actually Pennsylvania Deutsch, Pennsylvania German. And what was so interesting was we had some kids in the class who were Amish. And the Amish are very, very clear. You go into any little village or any town, you see the Orthodox Church and the Reformed Church. The Orthodox Church is saying we need to preserve the original teachings as they are, so we keep the integrity of these teachings and not water them down. The Reformed Church says we need to make this adaptable. We need to make these practices accessible for people. So we're going to do a little improv here. So the Amish are very much of the Orthodox camp. And the Amish are very, very clear. No cars, no electricity, no buttons on your clothing. Anything that smacks of, a lot of it is around military, anything having to do with military was very much a rejection of that. So a lot of the withdrawal from technology was really a reactivity toward kind of the militaristic thinking. So when you see an Amish community, it's very, very clear. But you'll also see there's an incredible amount of creativity of how the workarounds. But I can go into that later. But then you have the Mennonites. Now the Mennonites, they're in the same branch, but they're more in the Reformed Church. And here it gets really confusing because you have something called the black bumper Mennonites that say, well, you can have a car, but it's got to be black, including the chrome. So you'll see these trucks or cars where everything is painted kind of a flat black. Or you'll see those, and these are all like the church is going to decide. You can have a tractor, but you can't have rubber tires on your tractor. So there are tractors that have metal tires with cleats. Anna Brubacher, who was in my kindergarten class, her family had electricity, but they only had the electricity on Sunday when they had company. So there's something very confusing around how the Mennonites make their way, but at the same time, it really kind of points toward the main point that I want to make here is this teaching around virtue. It's self-determined. It's your task is to find what does it mean for you to be virtuous. So let me go through these 5 precepts, and I wanted just to talk a little bit about some of the variations that are available when you reflect on what it means for you. So the precept around not killing and non-harming, you can take that out to one extreme, and there's this beautiful example of the Jain monks. The Jains are, the rules they live by they're kind of unreal. If you see a Jain monk, you'll see that they have a cloth covering over their mouth so they don't accidentally inhale and harm a bug. They wear no clothes. And when they walk, they have a feather or something device to kind of sweep in front of them, lest they harm a bug or an animal as they walk. They have a commitment. They only stay in one place for a very short period of time. I think they only have one meal a day. It can't be any more than what they can hold in an open hand. Non-harming is taken to such a point where everything is designed around non-harming and non-killing. And there's a beauty to this that's really quite extraordinary. Now, on the other hand, If we look at the Tibetans, and in the Tibetan culture, living in the mountains, the only thing available is meat and sampa, the barley that's grown. There's just not a lot of fresh vegetables. So kind of the natural way of surviving in the Tibetan mountains was meat. And so there are different rules. First, there are lots of prayers before taking the flesh. There are also a number of rules and different traditions around, well, you can have meat, but you can't kill it yourself. It's interesting just to note how now in the Tibetan tradition, there's a very, very powerful movement of moving from the meat-based culture to a plant-based culture. It's very, very cool. So for others, this whole idea of non-harming is to eat cruelty-free eggs, for example, or to focus on gratitude when you're taking something that is animal-based. So here you can kind of sense there's a range. You can take it all the way to one edge, and you can take it toward the other. The whole idea of the whole precept of not stealing. Well, in some traditions, if you're caught stealing, your hand is taken off. Other traditions say, or the Orthodox tradition says, well, that one's pretty simple. Don't own anything. Do not own anything. And when desire or coveting arises, just kill it. So that very much that sense of like, do not. And as we would say around non-stealing, if you don't have a car, you won't have car problems. Celebrate the fact that you are living simply. Now, the Reformed practice, when you reflect on what does it mean to not steal? We live in such a complex world. What does it mean to be a giver in life and not a taker? Are you living in a way that you're taking from others? In this time where we're so much more aware of systemic racism and classism in our culture, aware of how much of our society was built on extracting labor from people who had no power. In your position of privilege, what does that mean to not steal? When we explore the precept of no sexual misconduct, well, many traditions say just don't go there. Just say no. And one Southern Baptist from Texas said, well, what I was taught was that sex is a horrible, ugly, and terrible thing. So you should wait and save it for someone you really love in marriage. Now, the other approach is to be mindful of doing no harm sexually. And then there are other traditions that actually embrace the play of using sexual energy as fuel. When you look at the practice of Tantra, where you're actively engaging with sexual energy as a way to wake up the energy and wake up consciousness. Where do you find your way here in terms of mindful sexuality? In terms of the precept of not lying, well, in an Orthodox practice and retreat, you don't speak. And there are many traditions where you just don't go there, because as soon as you make a break with speech, you're doing harm. Others are around exploring all the different avenues of how to be intimately aware of doing no harm when speaking. When you look at nonviolent communication, or the beautiful teachings around wise speech, which I'll touch on later, is to really pause when speaking and ask yourself, is what I'm about to say helpful? Is what I'm about to say truthful? Is it kind? Is what I'm about to say timely? Is what I'm about to say something the other person can actually hear? Bringing that quality of mindfulness to speech, Very powerful practice. Now, the fifth precept of refraining from intoxicants that cloud the mind. Again, Orthodox, don't go there. You cannot trust yourself, so don't even go there. Others say, well, be mindful, be aware of the substances that you use and the impulse behind them. And that might not just be kind of gross intoxicants, but also to be aware of the subtle intoxicants, such as food or sugar or caffeine. Pay attention. Swing that to the other side, and now we have all these studies on the incredible transformative powers of mind-expanding substances and their effect on consciousness, of exploring psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, microdosing as a way of awakening consciousness, finding ways now we can kind of unravel trauma, that you can sort of see the mountaintop and explore how that might inspire your practice. So fundamentalism basically says, let me tell you what to do, and then do it. And anyone who disagrees with you is your enemy. Don't pay attention to them. I lived my life in many ways as a fundamentalist. Stay away from sex, let me give it a shot. Be silent, let me give it a shot. And so for many, many years, I lived a very, very confined life of no reading other than scripture for many, many years. It was very, very powerful to have those riverbanks. And at the same time, when I think back on my celibacy vow, I'm so grateful for those years. And I'm so grateful that those years were long ago, because I've learned a lot since then. So having these tight riverbanks can be really tantalizing and really powerful, but they can also be infantilizing. They can sort of take your power away. And what it comes down to, I think, is finding what resonates for you. We tend to think of these as thou shalt nots. But when I think of one of my most influential teachers, of Swami Kripalu, who practiced 12 years of formal silence and over 19 years speaking only a few times a year, I always thought of the practice of engaging from speech to be kind of a painful practice. But I had this one realization on a retreat when it was time for my interview after 3 days of not speaking, that the idea of coming into speech was almost unbearable. And I realized that perhaps when saints practice spontaneously, the silence is not an effort. It's almost like the breaking of silence is sort of like breaking a connection with presence. So I've really come to see how these practices are incredibly positive. They're beautiful things. And I'm aware of my time, which is running short. What I'd like to offer is maybe we'll close with just a short little reflection on the positive qualities. And these are sort of inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh, who had a beautiful reframe on these practices that look like restraints as being the possibility of opening. So if you like, you can close your eyes, and I'm going to share some of this with you. As you're ready, you can maybe just take 3 deep breaths. And you might just sense these following offerings as this description of awakening into wisdom and into loving presence. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence in myself and in the world. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I'm committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I'm determined not to steal, not to possess anything that should belong to others. I am committed to practicing right livelihood so I can help reduce the suffering of living beings. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivate loving kindness, compassion, and joy. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and promote peace in myself and among other people. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I'm committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness. You might just sense for yourself what your life would feel like, what your life would be like if you were to embrace the guidelines that cultivate greater wakefulness, the commitment to non-harming, the commitment to not taking that which is not freely given, the commitment to use sexual awareness and sexual energy in a way that promotes kindness and compassion, to practice wise and generous speech, to honor the body in a way that your energy can serve that which is most important to you. And so if you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes. Just a few comments before we close. I think it comes down to this. What do you most want in your life? And what are the rules you want to live by? What is your particular code of honor that is going to move you toward that which is most important? Each one of us has to figure that out. And we do have these teachings that offer these riverbanks for you to consider. And here's the kicker. Here's the punchline. I'm going to read a little bit. This is from the Dhammapada. And this is about the rewards of virtue. So Ananda, who's kind of the assistant, the secretary for the Buddha, says, what is the reward and blessing of wholesome morality? And the Buddha says, freedom from remorse, freedom from regret is how I view that. And what an interesting idea, to live a life of no regret. To live a life of regret to me means living a life of doing no harm. To live a life where I was awake to heart and mind possibility, and my actions were aligned with integrity. That to me is the possibility and the promise of reflecting on what it means to be virtuous in life. I hope you found this helpful. Many, many blessings in your journey. Thank you so much for your time and attention.